So happy to be joined once again by Brett Siegel, NBA Analysis Network. Brett, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Carolyn. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, of course. Thanks for being with me. What was your favorite headline to come out of All-Star Weekend?
I think it had to be Steph Curry's amazing performance. I mean, we've never seen something like that in an all-star game, in a regular season game, in a playoff game. To just hit 16 threes was absolutely amazing. I mean, that alone breaks what was the NBA record. I mean, it doesn't technically count as breaking the NBA record, but in everybody's minds, what he did was just absolutely historic. And I think it puts the rest of the league on notice that the Warriors are still right there in the thick of things for the one seed in the Western Conference, and that they very well could be the team to beat in the Western Conference this year.
I know you wrote a preview on NBA Analysis about what to expect the rest of the way after the All-Star break, and you mentioned how both conferences are pretty up in the air and could come down to the end of the regular season in terms of what we're ultimately going to see with playoff seeding. You mentioned Curry. What about Chris Paul and his injury, and how does that affect things out west?
Yeah, it affects not only the Western Conference, but the Eastern Conference too, because this is a team that many are predicting are going to be in the NBA Finals in the Western Conference. They're 48-10 on the year, the best record in the NBA right now. And Chris Paul's likely going to be out for the rest of the regular season. Maybe he'll come back for the final week and a half. But I mean, he's out 6 to 8 weeks, which pushes it right up to the first week of April, which is when the regular season ends. So we're looking at Chris Paul, who's the best player on the Phoenix Suns. He leads the league in assists per game this year, best leader in the NBA by far. And now they don't have their main point guard, the Suns. They have Devin Booker, who's more of a pure scorer than a facilitator. So he's now going to have to kind of take a step back and be more of a facilitator on this team. Cam Payne has been dealing with a wrist injury, so he may not be healthy to go right after the All-Star break, right on Thursday or Friday, whenever they play again. And then you're going to be relying on guys like Elfrid Payton and Aaron Holiday, who they just acquired to lead this backcourt. So I think it really changes the dynamic of this team. More guys are going to have to step up, and my eyes are on Cameron Johnson and Mikal Bridges. Those are their two main secondary talents outside of their core three of Booker, Ayton, and Paul. So those are the two guys that are really going to have to step up offensively for this team. How it's going to play out, I don't really know. I mean, 6.5 games is a lot to make up for the Warriors in a very limited amount of time, and they're without Draymond Green. Can they do it? Absolutely. I think this Western Conference race for the one seed is going to be a lot closer than people expect, and I don't think we should count out the Grizzlies either. They're 8 games out of first place. I don't necessarily know if they can claim the one seed, but they could easily move up to the 2 seed. They're a game and a half back from the Warriors for the 2 seed in the West, and they're right in the thick of things as well. John Morant has that team trending in the right direction.
And then the Eastern Conference is interesting because you just take Brooklyn, for example, a team whose complexion has changed drastically over the last couple of weeks. They've got Ben Simmons coming in. They're hoping to get Kevin Durant back, currently slated as 8th as it stands right now, but really only a handful of games could move them up as high as, to the 4th seed heading into the playoffs. So how would you assess what's happening in the Eastern Conference as the regular season winds down after the break?
It's the tightest race I've ever seen in the Eastern Conference in terms of the talent across the board. Because you look at even go down to the 10 seed, the Atlanta Hawks. That's a team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. And yeah, they've struggled this year, but I don't think any 1 seed or 2 seed is going to want to have to deal with the headache that is Trae Young this year. I mean, he's been a double-double machine, passing the ball and scoring from beyond the arc. So even they're dangerous. The Charlotte Hornets are one of the best offensive teams. They're the 9th seed. The 7 and 8 seed, those are 2 teams that I think could be dark horses to win a championship. I mean, obviously you have the Brooklyn Nets entering the year. They are many people's pick to win the championship, now more considered a dark horse just because of all the uncertainties with Ben Simmons coming back to play and Kevin Durant's knee injury and obviously Kyrie Irving's vaccine status. He's not going to be able to play road games in the playoffs most likely, or home games in the playoffs most likely. And the Toronto Raptors, they've looked like one of the best teams in the league over the last month. Pascal Siakam's playing at an all-NBA level. Fred VanVleet was recently a first-time All-Star. Gary Trent Jr. has emerged as one of the best three-point shooters in the league. So they're really mainly a starting 5 there. They don't have much of a bench. But, I mean, Toronto, all their starters play upwards of 40 minutes a game, and they'll play hard for all 48 minutes. So that's a team that could easily go on a run. The Celtics are the 6th seed. The Bucks are the 5. The Cavaliers are the 4. I mean, it's just up and down the standings. There's talent all around, and I really don't know what to expect from the East this year. It's really anybody's to win, and whoever gets hot, really. It's going to be a March Madness kind of style to it. Whoever gets hot at the right time is going to wind up going to the NBA Finals.
What do you think the future holds for Brooklyn with with Kyrie, you mentioned his part-time status, that sort of winding down in the regular season. I guess I really haven't given much thought what that might mean for the postseason. But, they brought in this veteran Goran Dragic. Is that somebody who will have an immediate impact, maybe spelling him at least at home? Do you expect Ben Simmons to be able to step in and perform? I mean, if Kevin Durant comes back, they were 4-12 without him, but if they get all these pieces together and Steve Nash can make it work, I mean, how formidable are they to potentially make something happen in the postseason?
Well, I think they're in a better position than they were with James Harden just because of the more depth that they have. Andre Drummond was a perfect addition for them down low. They've been searching for a big man that can be a dual threat in terms of rebounding and scoring in the low post, and they got that with Drummond. He's a former All-Star, one of the best double-double big men in the league, so they got the front court covered. They replaced Joe Harris' shooting production with Steph Curry, who's one of the best three-point shooters in the league in the history of the NBA, actually. So they have that covered alongside Patty Mills. And then in their backcourt, that's really the question mark with Kyrie, Goran Dragic, and Ben Simmons. I can say that Ben Simmons is a few weeks out from being ready to play. I believe that they're looking towards maybe like the week of March 10th or maybe a little bit after for that. So we're still a few weeks out from seeing Ben Simmons actually take the court. So that will be interesting for sure. Kyrie Irving's still going to be his away-from-home player. He's still going to be playing road games. And they're going to count on him in road games because they're going to have some tough ones coming up down the stretch against some key Eastern Conference teams. And then we look at Dragic. How is this really going to impact the Nets this season? He's going to be a guy that is going to come in, maybe play 15 to 20 minutes here and there, but it's not going to be every single night. They kind of added Dragic, given his experience and especially with the Miami Heat a few years ago, taking them to the NBA Finals. So he has that experience. And also because they're not completely sold on Cam Thomas being one of their main options in the playoffs. I mean, when Kyrie's out in home games and maybe Simmons is on the floor, like you don't really have many backcourt options there. You have Patty Mills, Seth Curry. Neither one's really a true point guard per se who can be a main facilitator. They're more shooters and scorers off the dribble. And then Dragic, he's a facilitator. Cam Thomas, he's more of a spot-up shooter and a microwave scorer, as we've seen in his rookie season this year. So Dragic can come in. He can be kind of a stabilizer for this team offensively. He can get the ball to Kevin Durant. He can get the ball to Ben Simmons. He can get the ball to Seth Curry. So he's just more of a security blanket for this team. He's not going to be a former all-star type player on the court for them. Just another guy that they can count on to give them production when they need it, similar to how they wanted LaMarcus Aldridge and Paul Millsap to be this year.
I think also a veteran leader that they don't have to worry about, that they know probably is not going to be a headache too, right? That has some experience with Steve Nash, with the two of them playing together. I feel like Nash knows exactly what he's getting in a player like that. It's interesting to hear you say that you think Simmons is still a couple weeks away, because I think some fans were hoping, maybe not expecting, but at least hoping that they would see him sooner rather than later. Just while we're in New York, what is your take on what has transpired this season with the Knicks? I mean, so exciting in last year's postseason, and then thinking that they were going to come in with a lot of promise this year, but things have broken down somewhere. Where have things ultimately gone wrong?
I think it's just gone wrong in terms of the personnel that they have. It just doesn't gel with one another. They don't have the right offensive talents in place. And early on in the year, yeah, they looked like a team on paper, and through the first few games, they looked like a team that could really get back to the playoffs as like the 4 or 5 seeding, maybe potentially go on a run, because you had Julius Randle coming off the All-Star season. RJ Barrett is a growing young star in the making. You added depth with Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker. You had Derrick Rose and some young pieces, but nothing has really worked out for them. Derrick Rose has been out since I think it was December, early January with that ankle injury. And then Kemba Walker hasn't been the same since those knee injuries, so he doesn't look like an all-star anymore. And then Evan Fournier, he's stepped up at times, but what more is he than a three-point shooter on the wing for them? And when Julius Randle's struggling, this team doesn't have any main facilitator. They don't have any main scorer, and that's shown with RJ Barrett and Derrick Rose being out. Julius Randle cannot do it on his own. They need another superstar talent, and they failed to get one at the trade deadline. They could have gone after CJ McCollum, and they didn't. They could have gone after Domantas Sabonis, and they didn't. They weren't willing to put up their best young talents in Obi Toppin and Quentin Grimes and other guys to get them. And so they held on to their draft picks. They have their young talents, and that seems like the direction that Leon Rose and Scott Perry are going to go. They're going to continue to believe in their system of their young guys in RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, Julius Randle, Quentin Grimes, and keep molding these guys together. And I think we're going to see a lot of movement with them in the offseason. We're going to see them try to unload the contracts of Alec Burks, maybe Nerlens Noel as well, to free up a little bit of cap space. And all of a sudden they have $20 million to work with. And maybe that's enough to bring in another superstar, all-star talent. I mean, Bradley Beal could potentially be on the move. We don't know what's what's going on with him. We don't know what's going to go on with Damian Lillard in the offseason with Portland rebuilding. And then the big storyline in the NBA right now is that the Pelicans players are not talking to Zion Williamson, and he's not talking to them. Maybe Zion becomes available, and he wanted to go to New York right in I believe it was the 2018-2019 draft.
Yeah, that's right.
And they now have RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish, his two best friends from college. So who knows? Zion could potentially be in New York before we know it.
On the West Coast, Brett, how should we interpret what LeBron has said about Sam Presti? And what do you think is ultimately fueling that?
Well, I think that it's LeBron realizing that he's not going to win another title with the Lakers, and that's just how it is. They don't have the cap space, one, to put together a good team. Two, they limited themselves because they got Russell Westbrook. They're not going to be able to get out of that contract this year since they didn't trade him. They're not going to waive him. And since he has a $48 million player option for next season, they best believe he's going to opt into that as well. So the only trade that they could possibly make involving Westbrook to unload his contract is to take back John Wall's $44 million contract. And does that really make them a better championship team per se? I don't believe it does. So they basically put themselves in a situation where they have no money, they have no young assets, they have no draft picks, and they can't do anything with it. All they can sign is minimum players. So they're going to be stuck with basically the same kind of roster next year, simply because you're not going to get these 27, 28-year-old stars coming to Los Angeles on a minimum contract. It's just not going to happen. So they really screwed themselves up this past offseason by getting Westbrook. They took a chance. It could have worked out, but it just hasn't. So now LeBron's kind of looking towards the future. He has one more year left on his contract, and after that, he can enter unrestricted free agency, and he can basically sign with any team in the league if he wants to. So maybe he'll take another one-year deal with the Lakers before Bronny's ready to enter the NBA. And if Bronny gets drafted, he said he's going to go to whatever team that is, and he doesn't care about the money, which makes it sound like that he just wants to play 1 year with his son, have that be the farewell tour. He'll take a minimum contract, and then he'll retire. So the comments about Sam Presti are interesting only because you look at the Thunder and they have, I think it's a gazillion draft picks through the next 5 years or so. So there's a good chance if you roll the dice, Sam Presti's face is going to show up on that if he can draft Bronny James. So that's probably why he's saying that. He should start to plant some seeds and be like, hey, I want to play with my son. This is what's going to happen.
Do you think that the Lakers were as aware as they should have been at the time of the risk associated with an experiment like Russell Westbrook?
I think it was a lot of public backlash from what had transpired the previous season. So they won the title in the bubble, and then coming off of that, obviously the mental strain on a lot of people in the NBA and all the injuries that they had to deal with LeBron James and Anthony Davis being out. There was a lot of pressure on that front office to go out and get a third star because Davis hadn't been healthy. And with LeBron getting older, you can't rely on him to do everything anymore because he's just simply going to get hurt. That's just the nature of the sport with older players. They can't play as much as they did when they were younger. And as good as LeBron James is, we've seen he hasn't been able to carry this team in recent years in terms of when Anthony Davis is out and he has all these other old players around him. So I think that it was a lot of pressure on the Lakers front office to get a move done. They had that deal in place for Buddy Hield. They were going to send Kyle Kuzma, Montrezl Harrell, and a first-round pick to Sacramento for Buddy Hield right at the NBA draft. And then there was pressure from LeBron and Davis on Rob Pelinka in the front office to get the deal for Westbrook done. That's the guy that they wanted to play with. They had spoken to him in the offseason around July 4th. They had gone out to meet with him privately in his home, and they all decided that they can make this work. So Pelinka believed in his players. He went out and got the player that they wanted, and it just hasn't worked out. It's just the nature of what it is. Personally, I think that they should have gone with Buddy Hield. I think that would have been a great option for them, and they would have had a little bit more cap space to maybe add another key player at the trade deadline. So who knows? It's all a big what-if scenario. Same thing what if the big three in Brooklyn had stayed together and worked out, and what if they were actually healthy? So it's just one of those hypothetical situations that we'll never have an answer to.
I know, what a shame. All right, before we let you go, Brett, great analysis. Is there anything that you're paying attention to storylines-wise after the All-Star break into the end of the regular season that you feel like people are not paying attention to, whether it's a team in the Eastern Conference or the Western Conference that's going to make a serious push in the playoffs, or anything else that you're following of note?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and we touched on one of them earlier. It's the Zion Williamson situation in New Orleans. I think that's a really big development. I think it's more of a storyline than a headline. I think that The chances of Zion Williamson being on the move in the offseason are very real at this point, seeing as the Pelicans have no timetable for his return. And recently in their season ticket holder package that they sent to their people, it doesn't include Zion Williamson at all. They were mentioning Jonas Valanciunas, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, the coach Willie Green. No mention of Zion Williamson at all. His picture hasn't been seen at all. So I don't know at this point. I really think that Zion's time in New Orleans is going to be coming to an end, whether or not he gets traded or just enters restricted free agency after next season. It's very up in the air at this point, so that's a very big storyline to watch. And then I really do think that it's going to be a year of the sleeper teams. I think that there's been a lot of attention casted on teams like the Suns, the Warriors, the Lakers, the Nets. But I really think that we need to take a step back and consider teams like the Cavaliers, a team like the Memphis Grizzlies. Like, those are two teams that if they wound up making the NBA Finals versus each other, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if we got a Cavs-Grizzlies NBA Finals, I wouldn't be shocked, simply because those are two teams that everybody's sleeping on. They play with a chip on their shoulder, and they just look like that they're having so much fun out there. They're young guys. They're very energetic, and they look like a group of 10-year veterans. So I really think that speaks a lot of volume to the coaching and the culture that has been built in Cleveland and Memphis alike. So I think those are two teams that we need to watch. And as well, in the Eastern Conference, my pick right now in the Eastern Conference is the Miami Heat. They're at the top of the standings right now. They've been at the top all season long. And the best part about that is that they've always been without somebody, whether it was Kyle Lowry, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Herro. Somebody has always been injured for this team, and others have stepped up. And they're not household names either. Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, Omer Yurtseven, Dwayne Dedmon. These are all guys that were either out of the league or undrafted coming into the league. And Eric Spoelstra, who is basically an undrafted coach himself. We all know his story, having to work himself up through the Miami Heat ranks, going from a video coordinator and just working his way up the long hours that he spent to become one of the greatest coaches of all time. So I really think that Miami is one of the most complete teams in the NBA. They have depth. They have scoring. They can play great defense. I think that they truly are one of the teams to beat, and keep an eye on Chicago as well.
Yeah, I love that Chicago team. Brett, great stuff. Just remind people where we can find you, where we can read your stuff, your Twitter handle, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so the website is NBA Analysis Network. We got you covered on all trade rumors, all news around the NBA, all awards coming up since it's nearing the end of the season. We'll have playoff analysis as well. It's NBA Analysis Network. You can find me at Twitter at Brett Siegel NBA. That's Brett Siegel NBA on Twitter. And thank you, Carolyn. I really enjoyed talking with you, and it's always fun talking about the NBA and what's going on.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Thanks, Brett.